Let's get straight to the point with views from both sides of the aisle. We now welcome Austin Barber and Brandon Jones to our MPB studios. Austin is a Republican strategist and founder of the Clearwater Group. Brandon is an attorney and former Democratic member of the Mississippi House of Representatives. Gentlemen, welcome back to At Issue.
Hey, good to be here.
All right.
Us here.
This week, we got the anticipated conference committee on Medicaid expansion. On Tuesday, the House showed up with a compromise to their original proposal. The Senate showed up with essentially nothing, almost as if they were expecting the House to capitulate. But since then, the wheels of the machine have been in motion over at the Capitol. The chambers are reportedly nearing a compromise as we sit here and discuss this. So, reflections, Austin, on where we are and how we got here.
Well, where we are is we're not quite sure because we're trying to figure it out.
But there are some things that we know.
Yeah, there are some things that we know, which is literally reporting that just came out before we went on air, which is that the Senate has come back and said, you know what, we're going to go up to the 138%. We want to cover those people who fall in between the 100 to 138% of the federal poverty level, which is what the House has been pushing for a long time
since their original proposal.
Yeah, and the Senate was never at that point. I'm trying to figure this out. Who is it that's going to pay for the cost associated with leaving 100 to 138%? That group of people own health insurance exchange. Is the state going to pay for that? Are managed care companies going to pay for that? I think it's the latter, but I'm not 100% sure, Brandon. But they're continuing to work. Both sides are.
Yeah, I think there would be options built into that. But look, just big picture.
Yeah.
They've given a little, both sides. Mm-hmm. You know, now as we sit here on Friday afternoon, we know that both sides have given a little. And that's a great thing. And I think this process has proven to be a good thing. You know, we speculated that having open conferencing would be positive, and I think it is getting us closer to a good product. I have to give a lot of credit to these conferees.
A lot of politicking going on during
sides.
this.
Look, this is a complicated process, and negotiations can be complicated. I don't want to pretend that negotiations cannot be further complicated whenever politicians are having to do it in the open. So credit to them for continuing to stay at the table, continuing to negotiate. You know, it's well documented on this show. I've been frustrated. I've been frustrated individuals. I still have some of that. I've been angry at different times, pulled hair out. I fired off mean tweets, Austin.
You're a mean tweeter.
You know, but as I sit here today and those folks are still working and they still are coming back at each other, I have to say compliment to them for kind of weathering the storm of different frustrations that occur as the process wears on and still being willing to negotiate.
Yeah, and we have no idea where the votes will fall in the Senate. Of course, there's some things that got to happen before then. How does the House react to this? I got to think the House would take a deal like this. They have pushed for that upper level, the 100 to 138.
Right. It seems to me like they're going to the 138% and getting that full federal drawdown and getting, and getting that, that full expansion. However that 100 to 138% is managed, that seems to be the piece that's left. It seems like at least both chambers going forward. Now we still they still have to go to the floor and vote, but it seems like we've gotten to the 138%, which I think a lot of advocates for Medicaid expansion, that was the thing they were looking for most, right? How that was managed was always going to be kind of a back and forth between the chambers. But getting to that 138%, I think, is what most proponents and advocates for Medicaid expansion wanted, and we're here. So what does that say about that part of the process, those voices, and the cascade of drumbeats we've heard over the last few months?
Look, it's significant. I mean, a credit to those advocates. You've heard me be critical of some people that I felt like didn't raise their voices loudly enough. I'm very pleased that we've seen more and more vocal support for this program. Also, look, North Mississippi Chamber folks came out very full-throated, including some very notable Republicans. That's not insignificant. I mean, we saw that kind of cascade of voices have a big part in changing our state flag a couple years back. So that's a good thing. So it's all kind of culminated into a good place. And look, we predicted here kind of where we would be. I mean, it's another reason why folks ought to tune in and listen to the show, because I think we said this is going to come down to the work requirement. And now that we've removed all these other things, that's where we are. I think that remains the last piece. I mean, I think we are very close to a negotiated settlement here. It's just going to be a question of how they contend with this remaining piece of the work requirement.
Right.
I think the big difference, as I'm getting some information and trying to understand this, is the difference in the House compromise, which was delivered in the open meeting by Chairman of Medicaid, House Chairman of Medicaid, Missy McGee.
That was on Tuesday.
Yep,
Yeah.
on Tuesday. The difference in that and what has just popped publicly from a statement from the Lieutenant Governor is that managed care companies would pay for the cost associated, the state cost associated between the 100 to 138%. They're going to pay for it all, from 77% up to 138%. Managed care companies will pay for that. I believe the House compromise, there was not as much clarity about who was going to pay for the costs associated with that. These are premiums that people have to pay.
Yeah, thank you. I was about to say, clarify what that means.
That's right. You know, if you're on the healthcare exchange, if you go buy a health insurance policy, whether you're on the exchange or you're not on the exchange, you got to pay the premium. Their premiums could be $10, it could be $1,000. You got to pay deductibles. You got to go pay copays. Somebody has to pay for those, and the state, the House plan was like, hey, let's have the state pay for that. And I'm not doing enough. I'm not giving enough credence to the House compromise because I didn't fully understand it, because it's so new to me. They could have had managed care companies paying for it too, but I'm not sure. They could have had another entity that was paying for it. But it's clear with the Senate plan, managed care companies would pay from 100 to 138%. The state share. But I also want to say this: the Speaker has always pushed. Any interview you've ever heard him talking about this, hey, we need to get as much federal money for this as we possibly can. I believe that's the 90% level, and that will be a big win for the Speaker if he gets that, because he's always pushed for that. But this is this is the legislature going through this process and being very open with it, and trying to work out a deal that they think is best for the state. The governor is still going to have a say in this.
Yeah.
I imagine he's going to be thinking very hard about vetoing this, and that's a 66% threshold in both chambers to override a governor's veto, and that's going to be a really tight vote. So we should go one step at a time.
Yeah.
But this is really interesting. Government at work.
Yeah, well, I want to get the process here in a minute, but Brandon brought up the work requirement. That is kind of like the last remaining piece that the Senate is standing firm on. There are multiple ways to kind of go about the work requirement. There's put it in there, but then say, if the waiver is denied, go ahead with it anyway, which is what the original House plan had.
Yeah.
There's some talk about adopting what North Carolina did, which is put it in there, put a trigger in there that if CMS, the Center for Medicaid and Medicare, approve any other work requirement from another state, that it automatically triggers one in Mississippi. But then there's also the poison pill approach, where they could put it in there, and if it's not denied, I mean, if the waiver's denied, then the plan does not go into effect, and it could go into litigation. So, what are you looking at with that piece? I mean, that's the last remaining piece. What are you looking at and hoping for when it comes to that work requirement piece?
I don't know. I don't hope for anything.
Yeah.
I get the question. It is. There are a lot of folks who know way more about this than I do, who think it's going to be tough to get CMS to approve it. But I'm not about.
They haven't approved one yet.
Yeah, but I mean, who knows? They may decide to do this because Joe Biden wins or loses in November, and Donald Trump wins. And there's so many things that are so unpredictable to see what kind of pressure is being put on them to approve it or not approve it, Brandon.
If it's the poison pill approach, which is we have to get this waiver or the bill doesn't go into effect, we can read it as DOA.
Right.
Because first of all, I don't think it passes. I think at that point, what are we doing? Because there's why risk political capital for something that's not likely to go into effect? But I'm hoping that is is kind of where conversations are right now, to say, look, there are options out there where conservatives who feel strongly about this piece of the proposal, and I'm not going to argue the merits at this moment because we've done that before, but let's just say it this way. There are conservatives who feel as strongly as Delbert Hosemann claims to, and members of the Senate claim to about this, that have said, we don't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater. We're going to keep this language, we're going to keep the proposal moving, and to the extent that the laws change, to the extent that waivers begin to be signed, as you mentioned a moment ago, then we will revert to that type of a system. That is absolutely the most reasonable way to do this. I mean, to say we're going to go through all of this work that we've seen and all the straining that has been done and all the very difficult negotiation that's been done to get us to this point, and then we're going to adopt something that can be taken away from us unless people do something they've never done before. That would be incredibly just kind of disingenuous, and
We'll
I
see what
think they'd
happens.
lose ground. So I think they can't do that. They can't do that if they want it to go on. But we're right there. And look, what you want in a negotiation is you want to knock off issues. You want to take issues off the table. And I think we're down to that issue. I think most everything else is basically agreed on. So that is where the focus is.
Can I
now.
just respond to one thing
Yeah.
you said? But if it is your priority that this coverage, the 100 to 138%, should be for those people that I've mentioned a lot on this show. I always describe the young family of four, 2 little kids, can't afford daycare, mama's taking care of them, dad's out driving a truck, maybe has 2 jobs, and they're falling in that gap. So if a member of the legislature or the governors, their priority is, I want to take care of those people, then that's a priority to them. And you may not like that, and I may like that or not like that, but I get it if that's their priority. You call it a poison pill, and what you would say is, hey man, don't put that in there. But if it's your priority that those are the people that get covered, it's a tough situation.
No, let's be clear.
Am I explaining that right?
You're not. Because
Okay.
what we mean by the poison pill is you would put a provision in there that says the bill is dead and the program is dead unless you give us a waiver.
Yes. No,
That's the Senate's position.
Yes.
What they can do is what other states have done, which is to say, hey, we're putting this provision in here that says when y'all start granting these, we want that.
Okay. So if they grant it for Montana,
Then we would like to have the same condolence.
Okay.
Now, here's the thing, though, Austin, just to say, just on the policy side of this, the reason that that's misguided is because you pay for people to receive care one way or the other. The question is whether or not you want to have the benefit of federal dollars to help subsidize that uncompensated care that's now happening. So the work requirement has always been a little bit of a red herring to the overall conversation because you pay for this stuff. We are paying for it now. Yeah. We're paying through the nose. We're paying for it in the form of emergency room uncompensated care, which gets passed on to other people throughout the system and the hospitals take. And so that's the one thing that you just kind of want to say to the governor and the lieutenant governor, the people who say this is, look, folks, we're paying for it now. That you can like it or not like it, but you know what a hospital can't do? They can't have you come in at 12 p.m. or 12 a.m. on a Friday night and say, hold on, buddy, I see you got a bullet wound there, but do you have a job? Can you bring in your, they're going to have to treat that person, and then there's going to be a cost associated with it. And so we end up paying one way or the other. It's a question of, do we want to do it the smart way where we're not sending our dollars to other
I
states?
thought about referencing the great Seinfeld episode where Kramer tells Jerry, but that's a write-off. The post office just writes it off. And Jerry goes, you don't know what a write-off is. And Kramer goes, no, I don't. And you don't either. And he goes, no, I don't.
As we all know, if you're quoting Kramer, you're losing.
I was waiting for you to say that was a write-off. But anyway, I digress.
Real quick process question as we look at, because Johnson, you mentioned.
Wait, where's this question from?
I'm going to get there. You mentioned how the next step is to get this to the floor, and if they're going to override a potential veto from the governor, are they going to need 2/3? So we have a viewer question regarding process from viewer Marlon Mullins wants to know: can the governor simply receive a bill that he does not like and sit on it until the last possible moment of the session and veto minutes before the gavel? And prevent the legislature from overriding it. So it's a process question. There are rules. It's not the wild west. Yeah. So what is the process at this point as far as when lawmakers pass this conference report in their chambers, it goes to the governor. How long does he have? How long do they have to override a veto?
Yeah, thank you, Marlon, for the question. We should do more questions from the audience. I love that. Can we get a caller line? I want a light to blink when somebody's calling in. That would be fantastic. So good question, Marlon. Essentially, when the bills get formally moved out of both the House and the Senate, and as soon as it hits, quote, the governor's desk, he has 5 days.
While they're in session.
While they're in session. And so he can either sign it immediately, or he can, within those 5 days, he can sign it, he can veto it, or he can not sign it and not veto it, which would allow it to become law. He's got 5 days. The legislature, if he vetoes it, and if they are still in session, this regular session, they can take up his veto. If the legislature sent it to him and they had less than 5 days left, their session ended, and then he waited to veto it, they could not take up his veto until the next session, whether that was a regular session, 2025, or a special session that the governor would call during 2024. Great question.
Correct me if I'm wrong. There's one other thing that the legislature can do, which is they can pass a resolution suspending the rules and extending not necessarily extending the session, the number of days of the session, but saying that they can recess and then come back at a later date.
That happened in 2020.
Yeah, exactly. Which it happened often in 2020 because they're dealing with the pandemic. Yeah. So there is that other little window there. The legislature can pass a resolution allowing them to recess and return before sine die.
And Michael, that's why, and I'm not sure what the official sine die date is, May 4th, May 5th, May 3rd, somewhere like that. I'm not quite sure. But that's why the legislature was trying to get done with everything 5 or 6 days before that, so it would give the governor plenty of time. And if he vetoed anything that they wanted to try to override, they'd have time this session to deal with it.
Which you're right about that. Can I just say that I'm smirking because I've been
because Bo Nix got drafted by the Broncos. So bring that up.
Those are tears.
Brandon's a big Broncos
Those are tears
fan.
I'm fighting back. So I made a joke last week towards the end of the show about how all I was hearing out of the Senate side was, well, we might get to go home early or we might leave, and some of the goofiness of that. But this week, we heard more of that about going home. What you just said is the appropriate way. Hey, as long as we finish our business early, we want to reserve some of those days because that leaves us some maneuvering room for some of these things we just mentioned. I will say again, though, I'm going to renew my observation. You don't talk about going home when you have everything left to do.
Right.
Like, I was listening to these comments earlier from the lieutenant governor, and it was like, man, you cannot talk about going home when there's not a single conference report filed and you don't have a budget. Now, when you get those things done, then by all means, you can talk about leaving. But anyway, I think we're back on track. The legislature appears to be dealing more with reality now. They acknowledge they will be here next week. They will be here to have to do some of these things. So I think we're back on track.
They're going to work this weekend.
Yeah.
Yeah, and speaking of working in other things, they're nearing a compromise on PERS. There was legislation that changed the makeup of the PERS board, changed some of the things about PERS. It died, and then it was resurrected. But they're nearing a compromise on PERS. Austin, you're following this closely. What do we know about where we are regarding PERS, the public employee retirement system?
Yeah, that's always a mouthful. And they're also, I think, very close on an education formula compromise that would change the formula. Would also put more money into the system. But while we were coming into the studio today, the Senate was literally debating a brand new bill that they brought up, which means they had to suspend the rules to put a bill in committee and bring it up on the floor. Brought it out of AET, Senator David Parker's committee, and he was handling it. This bill would put $110 million into the PERS system this year. It would not, this is the Senate plan, House has got to get it if it passes the Senate, which I'm not sure what happened. They were not making changes to the board. It was going to increase the employer contribution 0.5% every year for 5 years. But it was essentially going to give the legislature the power to approve or disapprove any type of employer probably employee contribution, but certainly the employer contribution increase. Lastly, I think it said that the legislature in 2025 will create a new tier for obviously people who are not employed by the state right now, who would be on PERS, which is a great thing.
So future public employees.
That's right.
I'm
sorry, I should have led with this. It wouldn't change anything for current members, for current employees who are in the system right now. Wouldn't change any of their benefits. I should have led with that.
Now, again, I always kind of revert back to this when I ask you questions, but you served, you were a lawmaker, and some of these proposals strip the PERS board from their autonomy of making changes and gives that power to the legislature. Is that another thing lawmakers need to be doing?
So the last time we talked about this, the bill would have changed the composition of the board. This doesn't change the composition of the board, but it takes their authority to approve contributions away. So now they would be in a purely advisory capacity. This has been a fascinating thing to watch. And obviously there are hundreds of thousands of people who care deeply about this issue for good reason. I think that this whole issue this year was completely in response to municipalities who have very popular political figures at the local level who had a stroke when they realized they were going to have to increase their investment into the system, that 2% thing. And they did a great job of raising Cain, bringing their issue to the legislature. And I think most all of this has been in service to getting that little fire put out. And so what this bill does today is instead of employers having to give 2%, as Austin mentioned, it would be 0.5% for a period of years. The problem, though, now that you're turning the PERS board into an advisory thing, so we get past that little thing. So now you won't have a mayor coming and yelling at you.
Right.
But guess what you've done? Now, whenever the issue comes up again next year, which, by the way, it will, because as we've mentioned, it always does. Guess who's on the hook now without the slightest bit of buffer from a PERS employee or someone who is in the retirement system? They're going to call over to the PERS board, and you know what the PERS board's going to tell them? Call your senator.
Yeah.
They said we're advisory. They're the ones who want all the decisions. So I think they are being short-sighted here, because what they are going to do, and we know this, we do know this, they didn't like getting those hundreds of emails. They didn't like those phone calls. Well, guess what? They're about to get them every year.
Yeah,
because now they've taken some of the teeth out of the PERS board, and I think the unintended consequence is that now your senator and representative is going to have to do a little bit of customer service.
I have heard some members say to me personally, they don't hate that. They say, you know what? We're elected by the taxpayers. We're elected by our constituents in our Senate districts or House districts. And it should be our responsibility. These are taxpayer dollars. We should have this put on our shoulders. Yes, there are some number of members who don't want to deal with this because it is overwhelming. It will take, it is a stressful issue that reaches across the aisle on both sides
it's going to require them to sharpen up, though, too, Austin. Like last week, PERS had their meeting.
But I guess what I'm saying is I hear personally from members who think, yes, we need to deal with this more often. We need this put on our shoulders to make these decisions of using taxpayer dollars instead of just saying, well, it's the PERS board. And I haven't talked to 100 members.
I think they're speaking. No, I get you.
I'm sharing some just candid
I'm sure that's true. I think they're
conversations.
speaking from delusion, though, because I don't think they realize what they're saying. Not only is there the customer service piece of this, where now you have to deal with the public, but there is a there is a technical and expertise associated with the decisions that the PERS board makes that this legislature is not in any way ready to assume. And I think it's interesting that last week the PERS board had their meeting, and they had 8-hour work days. You know how many members of the legislature were there to engage in that? Zero.
I know, but
they need this expertise in the same way that we need a development authority.
I know,
the same way
Brandon.
we need an MDOT.
But I understand that, and I definitely get your point and appreciate your point. But the legislature is also making decisions right now about Medicaid expansion, Medicaid waiver programs, investments in education. How many of them are experts in any of that? I don't know.
Look,
That's a fair point.
It's like we trust the chairman.
Yeah.
We're on the committee. I either trust the chairman, the LG, the speaker, or my friend who's on the my colleague who's on the committee, or I'm on the committee. They're making a lot of huge decisions on problems that are on issues that are just as complicated as PERS, and that's why I think these few conversations I had, like, hey man, we should be making these decisions. If we're going to use taxpayer dollars for this, it should be on us. You're making a valid point, but I think I think we're both right.
If they don't do anything this year, then the way it's currently structured, the legislature is the only body that can change benefits,
Yes.
and the PERS board gets to set
Think that's
increase
right.
of employer contribution. So what we're changing here, in addition to addressing this 2% increase, is now, rather than the PERS board being able to, statutorily define these increases, or to have the trigger of law, now that would be purely recommendation, and then legislature would take on that responsibility too. I just think that's an interesting place to land. My observation at the beginning of all this was, I think this all started because they didn't like getting yelled at by the mayors. Mm-hmm. And now they're taking on a part of it that I don't think they realize. Well, it's just an interesting place for this thing to land, and I think they might be taking on more than they want.
And just last point, the House has got to get the bill if it even passes the Senate, which I assume it will. Then let's see how the House responds to it.
Yeah. All right. A bit of a pivot here as we wrap up this week's show. It is the final show of April, which brings me to this thought. Every month gets these either like state level or national designations. For example, nationally, October is Breast Cancer Awareness Month. In Mississippi, Governor Tate Reeves has made a few proclamations for April. Publicly on his social media accounts, he shared statements proclaiming April as Military Child Month and Beef Month. He's also, and this has been done for 3 decades, declared April as Confederate Heritage Month, but that one he did not share publicly. Instead, he left that up to Beauvoir, the home of former Mississippi Senator and President of the Confederacy, Jefferson Davis. Monday is also Confederate Memorial Day, and it's official state holiday in Mississippi. This is my question. It's 2024. Brandon, I'll start with you. Do these Confederate-themed holidays still have a place in Mississippi? And if not, what's the next step?
We have so much to be proud of in this state. As people listening to this program and who have studied our history know, we have some of the foremost civil rights leaders in the history of the world. We have people who have worked and continue to work to make this a more just and equitable place. There's also some really dark spots on our history in Mississippi, and celebrating secession and honoring secession is it should have never been done. First of all, the idea that we would celebrate breaking off from the Union and breaking off from these United States is a sad moment in our history, and the idea that we would commemorate it now as something that is worthy of our remembrance, and I think absolutely not. And I do think it's offensive when you boil it down to what exactly was that secession about, and you realize that it was about preserving the institution of slavery, which was primarily directed at our African-American population. Gosh, I cannot imagine what it must feel like to be a black man or woman who is living and working in Mississippi and has to deal with this announcement, this Confederate Heritage Month. So I don't think it has any place in our society. I wish the governor wouldn't have done it, and I hope we can discontinue this thing going forward.
Yeah, I mean, they just don't mean anything to me. I don't even know about it. I don't pay attention to it. I'm much more, I think like most people, focused on trying to raise my kids and make my city a better place, and what can I do to, help my state. I don't pay any attention to them, and they do seem a little outdated.
But is that a bit of a luxury that you don't have to worry about it? Whereas some people in Mississippi might see that as something to worry about, because it's it's an attachment to, as Brandon mentioned, a time where Their ancestors were
everybody
enslaved.
on this conversation, right? All of us sitting around the half table are recipients of white privilege. And there are things that we sometimes have the luxury not to think. I mean, Austin's not unique in that. I'm in the same. I mean, we're all in the same boat. I think as we think about this more broadly,
I don't. This is not a conversation. I wanted to come here and talk about what the legislature is doing, not get into this.
But the legislature has the power.
I know. I'm responding to what Brand, but I'm not going to go down that hole
from
with
a
him right now.
Policy perspective and from a perception perspective, what I would like to tell the governor is think about this in terms of young people and what you mentioned a moment ago. It's outdated. I think we all agree to that. I think most people agree to that. This is not the type of thing that young people looking to live in this state or come back to it want to have associated with them. Let's just put aside for a moment what culture that we're highlighting when we do this. It's just terrible PR. So I would say to the governor, it's divisive in a way that's unnecessary, and it drives people and repels people from the state when we say with everything that we do, we say, well, we disagree, but we love our state and we want people to be here. Well, this doesn't do that. This is divisive and it's unhelpful, and I wish he wouldn't do it.
Now, he has the power, and the proclamation relies solely on him. But lawmakers are the ones that have passed. It's codified that Monday is Confederate Memorial Day. It's codified that Martin Luther King Jr. shares a holiday with Robert E. Lee, and it's codified that Jefferson Davis shares a holiday with Memorial Day. So the legislature has a role to play. Are those issues important enough to elevate it to action, or the things that we talk about every day in here, Medicaid expansion, roads and bridges, infrastructure, education funding, are those too vital to put aside to address these other things?
No, they're real. I mean, they matter. And same way that we had this long statewide conversation about the flag and what do symbols mean and why do they matter? And why does it matter what our state associates itself with? Unquestionably, all those things matter. And the cynicism that is inherent in partnering Dr. Martin Luther King's holiday with Robert E. Lee is it's so obviously cynical and a throwback. We absolutely should dispense with all of that. We should dispense with all the trappings of secession. We just should.
All right. Well, I'll leave us there. This has been At Issue on MPB Think Radio, a weekly discussion about the 2024 Mississippi legislative session. If you can't catch us live each Friday at 6:30, At Issue can be streamed on demand on the MPB Public Media app, or you can subscribe to the At Issue podcast. Each week's podcast includes an extended version of our weekly interview, as well as an extended version of our roundtable discussion. And if you'd like to see what we all look like, the full interview and roundtable are available on YouTube. Just search Mississippi Public Broadcasting At Issue. I'm Michael Guidry from all of us at MPB. Thank you for listening.